ones who set up the voting systems and the voting booths. And if Mr. Trump is suggesting that there is a conspiracy theory that is being propagated across the country, including in places like Texas, where typically it's not Democrats who are in charge of voting booths, that's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense, and I don't think anybody would take that seriously. Now, we do take seriously, as we always do, our responsibilities to monitor and preserve the integrity of the voting process. If we see signs that a voting machine or system is vulnerable to hacking, then we inform those local authorities who are running the elections that they need to be careful.
The right one, but I have declined to be a co-author of this bill until this hearing because I wanted to try and keep an open mind on this subject and listen to the witnesses without being a co-author of the bill. But coming from Silicon Valley, you can imagine that I have had considerable input from people who are quite skilled. And I guess the question that needs to be answered is, can this election be hacked? There are many issues. I'm sure we'll get into them today, but the integrity of the election process is absolutely essential to the sustenance of a vigorous democracy. Elections do count, as we know, and the direction that our country is going in will be decided by elections. And if we can't know for a certainty that that process is not corrupted, then it really goes to the core of the spirit of our nation and our future as a democracy. So I realize we're not in a markup mode here today. We're here to get information. I'm going to listen very carefully to all the witnesses, but I'm hopeful that we could take quick action because my own state of California has already moved in the direction that Mr. Holt is suggesting with a verifiable paper audit trail. We need to be able to let the voters of America know that their elections are on the up and up and their vote really does count and the election has not been hacked. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding this hearing, and I will yield back because I'm eager to hear a very large panel of witnesses before we are called to vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your statement, and Mr. Holt's statement will be entered into the record, as we mentioned earlier. And in setting up the panel for this hearing, I was determined to try to get the broadest representation possible. I would have had to have 27 witnesses to totally accomplish that. But the fact that we have tried very hard is indicated by the large number of witnesses we do have. I'm very pleased with the quality of the witnesses who agreed to appear, and we now turn to Dr. Felton for his testimony. He is a professor in the Department of Computer Science at Princeton University, which also happens to be Mr. Holt's district. He recently completed a study of an electronic voting system and will give us a report on his findings. And I also understand you have a demonstration for us, Dr. Felton. You may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could you turn on the microphone, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today.
Mr. Chairman, there's lights on that. Is there a way to?
Yes. I wonder if the...
No, much better.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. From a security standpoint, what distinguishes computerized voting systems from traditional systems is not that computers are easier to compromise, but that the consequences of compromise can be so much more severe. Tampering with an old-fashioned ballot box can affect a few hundred votes at most, but injecting a virus into a single computerized voting machine can potentially affect an entire election. 2 weeks ago, my colleagues Ari Feldman and Alex Halderman and I released a detailed security analysis of this machine, the Diebold AccuVote TS, which is used in Maryland, Georgia, and elsewhere. My written testimony summarizes the findings of our study. One main finding is that the machines are susceptible to computer viruses that spread from machine to machine and silently transfer votes from one candidate to another. Such a virus requires moderate computer programming skills to construct. Launching it requires access to a single voting machine for as little as 1 minute. I will now demonstrate this using a virus we constructed in our laboratory. We've set up here a simulated election for president between George Washington and Benedict Arnold. It's election day morning and we just opened the polls. No votes have been cast yet. I'll start by casting the first vote. When I checked in at the polling place at the front desk, the poll workers gave me this voter card, which I now insert into the machine. I press the start button, and I choose to cast my vote for George Washington. The machine asks me to confirm my choice, and I confirm my choice and cast my ballot. The second vote is similar. I insert another voter card, I choose George Washington again, and again I confirm and cast my ballot. The third voter inserts another voter card and votes again for George Washington. The correct vote count in this election, obviously, is George Washington 3, Benedict Arnold 0. Now it's the close of election day. A poll worker inserts a special supervisor card into the machine. Enters a PIN code, and tells the machine to end the election and tally the votes. The machine will now print out a paper tape summarizing the ballot count. When I cast my votes earlier, my choice of candidate was recorded in the machine's electronic memory. This record of my vote was invisible to me. I had no way of verifying whether it was recorded correctly or whether it was changed after it was recorded. In this machine, the records were modified by our virus. This paper tape, printed out by the machine, reports the election's result. And it shows George Washington with 1 vote and Benedict Arnold with 2. Every record in the machine and outside the machine is consistent with this fraudulent result. Our technical report, referenced in my written testimony, goes into considerable detail about this problem and explains why existing election procedures are not sufficient to prevent it. One lesson is that security depends on getting the technical details right. Too often, the designers of this machine failed to get the details right. A good example is the access door here on the side of the machine. It protects the removable memory card that stores the votes, so the door should be locked securely, and access to the keys should be strictly limited. But in fact, tens of thousands of AccuVote machines can all be opened with the very same key. And this very same key is used widely in office furniture, jukeboxes, and even hotel minibar keys, and even hotel minibars. It's easily purchased on the internet. This one I bought online from a jukebox supply shop, and it does open the machine. The implications of our study go beyond just this machine and reveal broader systemic problems. More worrisome than any specific vulnerability is that this system, despite its many problems, was certified, purchased, and deployed by many states and counties, and has been used in important elections. We can do more to improve the security of our e-voting. I detail many recommendations in my study and written testimony, but one important safeguard is a voter-verified paper audit trail. A well-designed paper trail can improve security and enhance voter confidence without compromising accessibility. Certainly, paper records have their drawbacks, but they have different failure modes than electronic records do. And the combination of electronic and paper records together can be more robust against fraud than either one would be alone. Getting the details of voting right is difficult, especially in today's high-tech polling place. But failure is not an option. The stakes are too high, and the risk of malfunction or fraud too great to make our current course tenable in the long run. Election experts, accessibility experts, and computer security experts all have a role to play in improving our voting system. If we work together, we can solve this problem and give the American people the voting system they deserve. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Our second witness is Gary Smith. Mr. Smith is the election director in Forsyth County, Georgia. Georgia uses a paperless DRE system statewide. And for those who don't know what DRE stands for, it's Direct Recording Electronic Computer. Basically, it's the type of computer we have displayed here. Mr. Smith uses a debolt system that was the subject of the Princeton studies. Mr. Smith also participated in the recount of the Cuyahoga County primary that was conducted on a DRE system with a paper audit trail. Mr. Smith, you are recognized.
Well, as he's mentioned, my name's Gary Smith. I reside in Forsyth County, Georgia.
Is your microphone on?
Is that better?
Yes. We have an overflow room and people there are very anxious to hear you. And
all right. Well, my name is Gary Smith, as you mentioned, and I am the election director for Forsyth County, Georgia. It's a county just north of Atlanta. It's quite a fast-growing county. We have about 80,000 registered voters, and we are one of the top fastest-growing counties in the United States. So we have a lot of issues that we have to deal with all the time. One of the things I think that's important maybe is to look at what those of us as election directors, how we come about. I'm actually appointed through a selection committee that comes about where a grand jury is brought forth. They pick a panel of people who have the background to be able to do this. It's then sent up to the Chief Superior Court judge, and then I am selected from that. I was selected from that process. I'm in my second term as the Director of Elections. It's a term of 4 years, and it is a nonpartisan position. Prior to coming into this position, I spent most of my time working in the private sector. I retired. I was running various companies, and I have worked most of my life in industrial automation. So I have a technical background. I have an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering, and I'm also a certified election and registration administrator from a program that's administered by Auburn University. As the director of elections, one of the things that I've been privileged to do is to be able to sit on a task force, several of them. One has been from the Georgia Task Force, which allows me to be able to participate and look at new processes and equipment that we apply to elections in our county and our state. In addition to that, I served on a national task force for election reform for 2004, where we looked at all the processes across the country with regards to elections. In addition, I think you just mentioned, is I did lead the manual recount for the Cuyahoga County VPAT, so I have some practical experience with that, and I was happy to be able to do that. I did it spent a week at it, as a matter of fact. We have implemented the DREs, the one that you're looking at right here, which is the debolt TS unit. In fact, my county and 158 counties in Georgia implemented this during the general election of 2002. We have held, from what I heard was the last count, something like 2,500 elections in our state. In addition to that, I have held elections on special elections, primaries, general elections, runoffs, and just about any kind of election, and a municipal election as well. So again, we have a lot of experience with them. One of the things that I think has been talked about a lot, and I think we have to deal with, is, how do you look at the security and the integrity of this kind of equipment? It starts with, obviously, with the vendor who builds the equipment, goes through the independent testing laboratories that then look at it to make sure that what we are receiving has the technical wherewithal to be able to provide us with a piece of equipment that really meets what our needs are. Thirdly, we have in our state, which I'm very proud to talk about, is the Center for Election Systems. It's a program administered by Kennesaw State University and Dr. Britt Williams, who's a well-known authority in elections. We do all of our creation of our ballot cards and that sort of thing through this group. And so it's another level of testing that we have that goes on. Lastly, it's up to those of us who are election directors to hold these elections. So I'm tasked with a lot of the things that Mr. Felton has talked about, which is maintain the security and integrity of the process that goes on in elections. I guess we're where the rubber meets the road as much as anything. So that's our job. I'm not going to go through all of the details with regards to certification because it's certainly going to take a lot more than a few minutes that I've got to talk about it, but it is in my paper and I hope that you will look at it. I think where we pick it up is where we pick up the memory cards, as Mr. Felton has mentioned, that come to us from the Center for Election Systems. The process of making sure that they come to us under the chain of custody, manner, so that we know that there is at least more than one person that has access to, to what we're talking about or is they're looking at. We go through a process called logic and accuracy testing. This is when the process that he has talked about goes through the first part where we are taking the memory cards, we are marrying them essentially to the voting machine, and then we're taking them through the testing process, at which time then we lock the machines up and we pass them on to the next level, which really is the election poll worker himself. And what I'd like to do is to show you some of the chain of custody forms, and I think they're in front of you too. If they're not, I'm going to show you the one actually that's coming. That's going to be, will it go in there?
I'm set for each.
Okay. It's as good as it can get up there, but I think most of you can probably see it. And what I'm pointing out in it is the. Is it okay if I stand up?
As long as you carry the microphone with you, so all the people in the overflow room can hear you too.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. I think what is critical about this is, and I think this is one of the things, maybe that because we're doing it statewide, we've had an awful lot of good chances to be able to work the processes out. And I think Mr. Felton, one of the things he said is you need to have good chain of custodies in these things. This actually is for the precinct Big Creek. This is actually an actual form that we're using. It says here, item number 1, it's a custodian certification form for the AccuVote TS units that are going to be used. Under point number 2, what I've got here is I've got actually the touch screen serial number, which has got a number in here. It's 116827. Then across here, what you're looking at is all of the tests that we take individually to run on the machines. This takes about 15 minutes per machine to run. It's a process that's done under my direction, and we actually have done this for 500 machines for the upcoming election. The next point that's important to look at is that there's a seal number that is right here, and that seal number, what I'm going to show you is how it's carried forward to the process where when we're holding the election at the precinct, what happens with it the next thing. Okay, this machine then is sealed up. It has a wire serial number on it. Okay, so there's no access to this machine once the logic and accuracy testing is done. Now, the next form I'm going to show you is right here. This is the form then that is carried forward to the precinct itself, so that when the poll workers, the poll manager and his assistant, this is their responsibility. This is a form that's signed in triplicate. One sheet goes to the Secretary of State, one comes to me, and one goes to the clerk of the Superior Court. You'll notice again it's for precinct Big Creek 01. This is the recap sheet that goes with it. Here again is the serial number. If we had looked back before, we would find that that serial number is the same one as here. Now, thank you. This is cooperation. And I think it's great. Here's the serial number that then shows up on that is transferred from the original LNA testing. Thank you. Now, what happens with it is we open up the machines, we go through it, we do the count number, And then at the end of the election, because this is the recap sheet, the key part here is that there's another mechanical, low-tech seal put on it. It is a wired seal, so it's kept on there all the time. And that's the process that we go through. I wanted you to be able to see that.
Okay, and I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up because we have a lot of witnesses and a lot of discussion.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, is that it?
No, one of the other part I think that I wanted to talk about it, and I think this has to do with the comments that Ms. Melinda or McDonald said, is what's the confidence that people have in it? And I'd like to at least respond to that at another time, because we've done surveys in our county too, which show that 99% of the people feel that the process is an excellent process. So there is a high level of confidence in our equipment.
All right, we can defer that to the question period. So
Thank you very much.
thank you. And as a reminder to those, I should have mentioned it before, you have the little device in front of you with the lights on it. Green means go, yellow means sum up, red means you're in deep trouble. So please keep an eye on the clock. Next, I'm pleased to recognize Ms. Barbara Simmons, past president of the Association for Computing Machinery, and she's done a lot of work on voting systems. Dr. Simons, you are recognized.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On behalf of the computing professionals that constitute the Association for Computing Machinery, I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify today about e-voting system security and the need for voter-verified paper trails. Secure, reliable, usable, and accessible voting systems are critical towards ensuring transparent, fair, and inclusive elections. These are not mutually exclusive goals. I shall discuss aspects of both security and accessibility this morning. First, security. Because of the risks of software bugs, malicious code, or computer failure, we cannot trust that the results in a paperless voting machine accurately reflect the will of the voters. That is why voter-verified paper ballots or audit trails, or VPATs as we refer to them, are needed. VPATs are automatically produced by an optical scan verified by the voter when he marks it. Fortunately, 48% of counties have optical scan systems, so they already have VPATs. Optical scans can be used together with tactile ballot sleeves or accessible marking devices for accessibility. Some DREs have been retrofitted to produce VPATs. In fact, all of them for use in California, as Congresswoman Lofgren said. 2 years ago, ACM, a leading computer society, issued a statement calling for well-engineered voting machines that allow every voter to verify his or her record has been accurately cast by the inspection of a physical, e.g. paper record. At its 2006 National Convention, the League of Women Voters passed a resolution calling for voter-verified paper ballots or records to be used for audits and recounts. The League also urged that routine random audits be conducted in every election. Both the ACM statement and the League resolution can be found in my written testimony. In summary, as a defense against malicious or buggy software, we must have reliable, well-engineered, accessible VPATs. Policies and procedures that guarantee the integrity of the paper records, secure storage and delivery of machines, and so on. Mandatory random manual audits of VPATs, and a full manual recount if discrepancies are uncovered unless there is evidence that the VPATs have been compromised. I'll now discuss accessibility. People with disabilities should be able to vote privately and independently and be able to verify their votes. HAVA does not require that DREs be used for accessibility. There is evidence that a number of people with disabilities are finding that DREs are not meeting their accessibility needs. Kelly Pierce, a nationally known advocate for the blind and visually impaired, reviewed tactically discernible controls, spoken prompts, visual display, poll worker assistance, volume control and normalization, and ballot review for 4 voting machines. In his report for Cook County State Attorney's Office, Pierce concluded that if any one of the 4 machines were to be deployed in Chicago or suburban Cook County, many voters with disabilities, particularly blind voters, would not be able to cast a ballot independently and privately. Blind computer scientist Noah Runyon discussed his frustration with his hour-long voting experience in the 2004 presidential election, and I quote, "It took me 30 minutes to work my way through the ballots and make my selection. After that, I had quite a bit of trouble getting into the review mode to get a full list of all my selections. When I did, it went on and on for 23 minutes like a long, uncontrolled drink from a fire hose. The review function read each item and then at the very end said what my selection was for that item. It even threw in details of what the fiscal impact would be and took forever. This is completely backwards." He went on to say, "From the time I signed in and got my voter smart card, it took 8 minutes to reboot the machine as an audio voting machine, 30 minutes to make my choices, 23 minutes to review and verify, and another 4 minutes to make a correction and record my vote. Not counting the hour waiting in line, it took me about 65 minutes to mark and record my ballot." End quote. We do not have to settle for inaccessible voting systems. Old technologies such as text-to-audio devices, tactile ballot sleeves, and ballot marking and generating systems could be combined with new technologies that would make the entire voting and verification process accessible while remaining auditable. Technology, if engineered and tested carefully, and if deployed with safeguards against failure, can reduce error rate, provide more accessibility, increase accountability, and strengthen our voting system. However, the current state of e-voting technologies leaves us far short of these goals. We need paper trails and manual audits to protect us against failures and attacks. We need additional research to make voting machines more usable, secure, and accessible, and we need to work together to achieve these goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we turn to Mr. Keith Cunningham, who is the election director in Allen County, Ohio. He serves on the Board of Advisors to the Election Assistance Commission and also participated in the Cuyahoga County recount study performed by the Election Science Institute. Mr. Cunningham, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me say what an honor it is for a guy from a small town in Ohio to be sitting here before you today in this tremendous forum. I am also the immediate past president of the Ohio Association of Election Officials, and I want to say to you before I begin, when I wake up in the morning and head for my job, I'm feeling pretty good about it. I believe the job that I'm involved in, which is an elections director, has meaning and has merit and is doing things to make our country and our community better. One thing I think we all agree on is that electronic voting needs some type of verification system, some component that allows it to be audited. And of course, all systems need that, but as my predecessors have said, hard ballot systems, it's rather obvious how we audit those. Personally, I do not have any particular aversion to voter-verified paper audit trails. However, in Ohio, the system is that the voter-verified paper audit trail becomes the official ballot of record for recount purposes. I must say to you clearly, I am adamantly opposed, based on the experience I've had in Cuyahoga County, to that. I believe that program is setting election officials up for failure at this point in time. If the VPAT was to be extended to voters as a courtesy by which to check their votes, I have no problem with that. Of course, I think statistics indicate that voters don't even use it when it's available to them. I think the studies on hand show that maybe less than 10% of the people actually utilize that. We looked at approximately 350 VPAT tapes in Cuyahoga County, and over and over and over we encountered tapes that were missing, that were in some way compromised. You have the numbers before you, so I won't bore you with the statistics, but I think two of them are very important for you to remember. Nearly 17% of the VPAT tapes that were reviewed by that team, and that team consisted of a lot of Ohio election officials that came in to help participate. Nearly 17% of those tapes showed a vote discrepancy of 1 to 5 votes from the electronic machine. And nearly 10% of those tapes were either destroyed, blank, missing, taped together, or in some other way compromised. And my point is this, that when you use the VPAT at this point in time as the official record of a recount vote, it actually serves to disenfranchise the voter because votes are lost in the VPAT process. They're simply not there and cannot be retrieved. And we could have retrieved those votes by other means from those machines, but in Ohio we're not allowed to, because the recount official vote, ballot of record in a recount becomes the VPAT. And so I would submit to you that it was the paper that actually caused the count to be in question. Additionally, and we have some photographs here I'd like to show you, there is no reliable technology for which to recount VPATs. To ESI's credit, they had a makeshift kind of reel crank thing that you could put the tapes in and reel them up. This is kind of, you know, when these things are sort of like wrestling octopuses, as you can see. Yeah, let's go to the next one. These are some of my friends. I wanted to make sure they were here. Let's go to this is just kind of the scene. There you can see the machine that, you know, I'll tell you what I equate this to. We're pretty agricultural in my part of Ohio. I equate this to planting several hundred acres of wheat with a $1 million planting machine and then going out and harvesting it by hand like the Amish used to and stacking it up in the fields. If you go on, please, with, a lot, you know, this was mind-numbing, to say the least, to sit and, now keep in mind, we went through 300 and some tapes. There were probably nearly 4,000 tapes in Cuyahoga County. This took us 2 10-hour days, actually 2.5, because the first half a day was setting a system. Continue, please. This is simply a tape with no record printed on it. Continue again, please. Same thing. This is the information that we're looking through on the tapes, trying to, and remember, at least this is Ohio's rule, that when you recount a race, you can't recount any other race. You can only recount the race that is going to be recounted. So if you've got 27 candidates on the ballot, you've got to reel through all 27 to get to the race, maybe a down ballot race or something you're counting. Go on, please, with slides. I don't want to. This is an example of one that's taped together, that's obviously been in the machine. It accordioned up in the machine. I don't know how many, that black line probably represents 20 or 30 votes. I don't know, you know, there was no way to reconcile that. Go on, please. There's another torn tape, another shot of the crude machine we were using to do this. I think they speak for themselves. I honestly don't have any reason to believe DREs don't record votes accurately, but I understand the concerns, and I do believe that we should have some kind of audit system for it. I would say to you, considering the size and scope of the deployment of voting machines in the last 12 to 24 months in America, I think election officials have done a pretty darn good job. We're working on improving it. Unfortunately, I believe, and we'll wrap up here in just a second, I believe it is the environment which is slowing our pace of improvement. As a local election official, I'm going to tell you, I feel like I'm in a crossfire, and I know many of my colleagues do. And that crossfire is a very, very polluted conversation. And it's being polluted with political interest and corporate interest and scientific one-upmanship, and I often wish I had as many people helping me find the solutions to these things as I did identifying the problems for me. It would make my job an awful lot easier. I want to echo the remarks earlier that I do believe we should continue to fund HAVA. I think the underfunding of HAVA sends a very inconsistent message to those of us out there trying to do this on a daily basis. I would say to you also, please allow us to finish what has been started and what is in motion before we begin to tinker with this. We have been given a set of tasks that are very, very hard to manage. And again, in scope of the deployment that has taken place in this country, I don't want to say there weren't problems in it, but I think my colleagues have done a very good job. And I would hope that in the future, when we do begin to debate and speak about this, we can do it in honest and direct terms without misrepresentations, half-truths, and focus on what it is we need to do to cure these problems and make America's elections, give people confidence in them. And I think it's too far to expect, or too much to expect any less than that. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and we hear your cry for help.
I understand.
Namely, leave us alone. Let us do it. But I also want you to know that you're not the only one who has crowds of people yelling at him for a solution and offering no assistance. We experience that every day of the week. So you have our sympathy. The next person I'm pleased to introduce, James Dixon, Vice President of Government Affairs for the American Association of People with Disabilities. He's been a very strong advocate throughout this process of making certain that anyone with disabilities is permitted to vote and has a sanctity of the secret ballot, which is essential to all of us and essential to democracy. Mr. Dixon, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Ellers, member of the committee. I have two disabilities. I'm blind and I'm blunt. And in these 5 minutes, I'm going to summarize some of the points in my written testimony. First, I want to thank the members of Congress who passed the Help America Vote Act. I voted secretly and independently for the first time 2 years ago, for the second time just a month ago. I cannot put into words the glorious feeling and the pride that I had as an American. And I'm speaking for tens of millions of other Americans who have now the first opportunity to vote privately and independently. I've got a few stories to tell about the problems that I faced and which millions of other voters face when not being able to vote privately or independently. These happened to me, but literally there are millions of stories like it. The very first time I voted, the poll worker said to me, loud enough for everybody in the polling place to hear, "You want to vote for who?" On another occasion, I had a poll worker say to me, "We're very busy. Nobody votes for state legislator in these other races, so how about if we finish now?" On another occasion, I had a poll worker say to me, "These referenda are really confusing. Most people don't vote on them, so why don't we stop now?" On yet another occasion, I had a poll worker say to me, "This print on the referenda is too small. I can't read it to you. So can't we be finished?" That particular excuse did not get much sympathy from me. Touchscreens are the best existing product we have that offers accessibility to the greatest number of people. I participated in the earlier work that was referenced by Kelly Pierce. The rest of the story is that after those initial tests, the company was able to inexpensively and quickly make changes to the access procedures so that the problems were eliminated. Touchscreens, access is a continuum, and we need to have equipment designed so that as access increases, it can be cheaply, efficiently, and quickly installed on the equipment. Touchscreens are the only product available now that meets those requirements. At AAPD, we absolutely want secure, accurate, recountable elections that are systems that are accessible. The paper trail is not accessible. This is a California ballot. Try recounting. I'll leave for the committee. This is the roll that was not able to be counted in Ohio. Paper trail is a Rube Goldbrick contraption It doesn't work. It's not accessible. You can't recount it. It doesn't even offer verification. Not only do people not look at the verification, and the test done at MIT, where the computers were set up so that votes were changed, MIT students didn't find the changed vote when they looked at the verification on paper. When the verification mean was done audio, listening through earphones, they found the changed votes. I want to sum up with the following 3 points. Things have to be accessible. Thank you for making that stand in Hava. The paper trail does not even do what the proponents want. And the proponents are a very small group who speak very loudly. There have been over and over again public opinion polls. When voters use touchscreens, they trust them 80%. 80% when they use them. We shouldn't let a loud vocal minority using fear determine what's going to happen in the sanctity of the polling place. And the last point I want to make, and it is very, very important, is the real problems in our voting system are human factors, human errors, and before we order something to be done in the polling place, we need money to research and document what the problems are, and we need to test proposed solutions in the reality of the polling place, not in a laboratory. Put me in an empty room with a ballot box full of paper, and I'll hack into it in less than 60 seconds. Thank you again. This discussion is very important, and I would just ask you to remember that 80% of Americans who vote on touchscreens believe their vote is secure and accurate.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon, and we appreciate your comments about showing why it was so worthwhile for us to insist that all individuals be able to cast their ballot in secret. So thank you. Next, I am pleased to introduce Michael Seamus. He is a professor at Carnegie Mellon University and is also the director of the Institute for Software Research. Dr. Seamus, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a small correction to the record. I'm not the director of the Institute for Software Research. I'm just a member of the Institute for Software Research. But I'm also an attorney admitted to practice in Pennsylvania and before the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Since 1980, I've been an examiner of voting systems, electronic voting systems for various states. I'm currently an examiner for Pennsylvania, and I've personally performed 118 voting system examinations. I'm going to do my 119th examination next week. I recall that, Mr. Chairman, you're a physicist. Representative Holt is a physicist. I am a former physicist. My proposal is that we settle this issue like physicists based on scientific evidence and not based on emotion. I view electronic voting as primarily an engineering problem that includes the design of processes and procedures. Once the requirements for a voting system are agreed upon, it's then a matter of developing and manufacturing equipment and processes that meet the requirements. The question is whether Congress should be setting technical performance guidelines and engineering standards, as H.R. 550 would have it do, or whether such guidelines should be left to NIST and the EAC, as HAVA has already provided. The proposed bill is based on three major assumptions, all of which are false. First, it assumes that paper records are somehow more secure than electronic ones, a proposition that has been repeatedly shown to be wrong throughout history. Second, it assumes that voting machines without voter-verified paper trails are unauditable because they're claimed to be paperless, which is also false. They are neither paperless nor unauditable. Third, it assumes that paper trails actually solve the problems exhibited by DRE machines, which is likewise incorrect. The reason that mechanical voting machines were introduced over a century ago was to stop rampant fraud involving paper ballots. H.R. 550 would restore us to the year 1890, when anyone who wanted to tamper with an election needed to do no more than manipulate pieces of paper. The recent example in Cleveland, Ohio, Cuyahoga County, is extremely instructive. That was the case where we just heard that 10% of the paper trails could not be read. H.R. 550 provides that in the event of any inconsistency between electronic and paper records, the paper records are irrebuttably presumed to be correct. Attorneys such as myself are always wary of irrebuttable presumptions. Applying that provision to Cleveland would have resulted in the disenfranchisement of 10% of the electorate because their paper records could not be read. I cannot believe that the numerous sponsors of this legislation contemplated such an outcome. I did a review of U.S. elections starting in the year 1824 when popular vote began to be kept. And I looked at the percentage of times if you took 10% of the popular vote and subtracted it from the winner and gave it to the loser, how often would the outcome change? And the answer is, since 1824, 55% of our presidential elections would have been reversed if you couldn't count 10% of the paper trail. The argument is made that security problems with DRE voting demand remediation of the type proposed in the bill. Indeed, Professor Felton at Princeton, Hari Hursti, and others have done a great service by exposing security vulnerabilities in voting systems. Some of these vulnerabilities are severe and require immediate repair, but the point is that they are easily remedied. The question for the committee is what the proper response to such discoveries ought to be. When tainted spinach was found in California, Congress did not ban the eating or distribution of leafy vegetables, even though at least one human life had been lost. The appropriate reaction to the discovery of a security flaw in a voting system is to repair it, not to outlaw an entire category of voting machine with which we have a quarter century of experience. It's claimed that observed reliability problems with DRE machines would be alleviated by adding a paper trail. Field experience has shown the opposite. The failure rate of paper trail DREs is double that of DREs without paper trails. It should be obvious that adding a new device with moving mechanical parts to an existing electronic machine cannot improve its reliability. The effect of H.R. 550 would be to ban electronic voting entirely in federal elections. I want to repeat that. It would be to ban electronic voting entirely in federal elections. The reason is that the bill sets forth conditions that are not met by any DRE system currently on the market in the United States. If it were to pass in its present form, there could be no more electronic voting in this country, and Congress would be in the position, after having spent $3 billion on new voting equipment, of spending billions more to replace what it just paid for. I cannot believe that the numerous sponsors of this legislation contemplated such an outcome. Further, the bill as written mandates a system that would violate constitutional and statutory provisions in more than half the states. The secret ballot is regarded as an essential component of American democracy. Each one of the DRE paper trail systems that are currently on the market either enables voters to sell their votes or allows the government and the public to discover precisely how each voter in a jurisdiction has voted. I cannot believe that the numerous sponsors of this legislation contemplated that outcome either. I am in favor of voter verification. The proposed bill, despite incorporating the phrase voter verified into its title, does not come close to providing real voter verification. While it shows the voter that her choices were properly understood and recorded by the machine, it offers no assurance whatsoever that her ballot was counted, that it ever will be counted, or that it will even be present in the event a recount is demanded. Once the polls have closed, the voter not only has no recourse or remedy, but is powerless to even determine whether her vote is part of the final tally or to object if she believes it isn't. That is not voter verification, regardless how it may be denominated in the text of the bill. I submit that if Congress desires to enact a comprehensive statute mandating voter verification, it ought to verify whether the proposed legislation actually accomplishes that goal. Numerous effective verification methods are known that are not based on vulnerable paper records. These have not yet been implemented in viable commercial systems. I understand that scientists at NIST will soon announce another one. If H.R. 550 is enacted, there would be no point in continuing research and development on any such system, since the statute would prohibit any system that didn't use paper records. Professor Ronald Rivest of MIT has recently invented a voting method that allows each voter to verify, after the election is over, that her vote has actually been counted, a feature that is absent from the systems contemplated by H.R. 550. Professor Rivest's system also allows any member of the public to tabulate the results of the election for herself. So it's not even necessary to trust the official count. These discoveries demonstrate that voter verification is now a ripe area of scientific research, and it is far too early to mandate by statute a bad non-solution to a presumed problem. My purpose here today is not simply to complain about the bill, but to offer a constructive alternative. As part of my written testimony, I've included a complete markup of the proposed legislation that retains its essential positive features, such as voter verification, but eliminates its ill-advised provisions. I urge the committee not to report the bill favorably in its present form, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
And thank you for your testimony. We will now turn to questions from the committee, and I will begin. I give myself 5 minutes for that purpose. And Dr. Seamus, since we just finished with you, let me pursue one comment you made. I could pursue many, and I'm sure others will pursue those, but on the one you said paper trails are no more accurate than any other method. Let me ask if you would also include paper ballots, which are then read by a computer, in that category.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I don't think I actually made any comment about the accuracy of voting systems. I think I said that paper systems weren't secure. As far as accuracy is a very poorly defined concept in voting systems and extremely difficult to measure, because we need to know in advance the voter's intent before they go into the voting booth. Then we need to see through the entire chain of custody of all the ballots at the end whether the final tally really reflects how the voters intended to vote. That's nearly unmeasurable except in small laboratory experiments. So I actually haven't made a comment about accuracy.
Okay. In general, your comments about paper trails, do those also apply to paper ballots that are then scanned electronically?
Paper ballots that are scanned electronically are certainly subject to the same kinds of tampering. In fact, it's easier in general to tamper with those because they're cut sheets of paper. They're individual pieces of paper. There are all sorts of problems with optical scan voting, but it's certainly acceptable as a method of voting. We use it in Pennsylvania. It's in widespread use around the country.
Let me just extend that one little bit. In terms of recounting, in the case someone demands a recount, isn't the paper ballot a good, reliable method of recounting simply because the voters themselves have marked that particular piece of paper?
No. The problem is that once the voter has marked the ballot and verified that the ballot is marked the way she wants, she has no assurance that by the time the recount occurs, that same piece of paper is going to be in the hands of the recounters. Ms. Lofgren from Silicon Valley might recall that in the 2004 election in San Francisco, 3 weeks after the election, ballot boxes were found floating in San Francisco Bay with ballots in them. And so we have not solved the problem of security of paper ballots in a widely distributed voting system that we have in the United States with a couple of 100,000 precincts.
Thank you. I didn't realize we had that problem since the LBJ election and Tammany Hall, Prendergast, etc. Thank you. And quickly returning to Mr. Felton, I'm interested in your comments. How easily could one access the voting machine and insert a virus of the type you've commented? How long does it take to actually get the virus in place? Would someone need to access the machine for an appreciable amount of time, or is this something that a voter in a voting booth could do?
It takes about 1 minute of access to the machine, and I can show you roughly what would be involved. It would involve opening the door on the side of the machine, which would require getting a key. As I said, those are for sale on the internet. There may be some security tape that would need to be removed and might be missing already. Opening up this door, putting in a memory card like this into the side of the machine. The memory card would have been prepared in advance with the computer virus on it, then pressing the red power button and waiting about 30 seconds. And afterward closing everything up and putting it back. This is something that would be unlikely to be doable by a voter in the polling place, but if the machine is not guarded with a very careful chain of custody throughout its life cycle, it can be available to that. In my polling place in Princeton, The DRE machines sit unattended overnight the night before the election in an unlocked school lobby.
And how long would it take someone to actually get access to the machine to figure out or to write the program?
It requires some information about how the machine works. This is not a Manhattan project. It requires a moderate level of skill in computer programming and some limited knowledge, probably the knowledge that has, in this case, that had leaked from the vendor to the internet a few years ago would be nearly enough. And I think that an unscrupulous person would not have difficulty getting the necessary information.
So from the time you started looking at the machine until you devised the virus, what sort of time was involved?
We got the machine in May. At first we spent a lot of time taking it apart to understand everything we could about how it worked. We were interested not only in whether a virus would be possible, but we really wanted to understand all of the security mechanisms, and we wanted to treat it very carefully. From the time we started developing virus code until we had a working virus, perhaps a few weeks.
Thank you very much. My time has expired. I'm pleased to recognize my ranking member, the gentlelady from California.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again for this very interesting hearing. The one thing I want to say about my friends in the Senate, they have a bill out now saying that every polling place should have a large supply of emergency paper ballots that can be used in emergency situations. That's just where we are. That's what we think about voting now in this country of ours. And so Senator Dodd and Senator Boxer and others have submitted this bill. But I have said all along that there's a security issue here. There's an issue that a trust issue that we must come to bear with in terms of voters. Mr. Felton spoke about when there are consequences, there are compromises, or consequences bring compromises, and I want him to expound a little bit on that. And he also said that existing election procedures are not adequate for elections. I want you to expound on that too, sir. And tell me, if Mr. Dixon feels a paper trail is not adequate, especially for disability, then you are suggesting, Mr. Felton, that paper trails do cut down on voter fraud. So, we have some imbalance here. If you can just speak to that for me on those issues.
Yes, thank you. The first issue had to do with the consequences of compromise being worse in an electronic system. And in the example that we gave here, there is a computer virus that will spread itself from one voting machine to others. And the consequence is that if someone is able to compromise one machine, the virus can spread to many machines and potentially affect all the votes on all of those machines. As compared to fraud with an old-fashioned ballot box, where access to a ballot box only allows someone to tamper with the votes that are in that ballot box, or maybe increase them by some amount. But access to one cannot involve stealing tens of thousands of votes, as with an electronic system.
But this virus, as you say, can pass from one machine or one voter to the other. I think you stated that. How can that be when I'm told that manufacturers do not give out this so-called code, a secure code that they use? How can that then be done with that?
Well, the way that this virus spreads is on these memory cards. The memory cards are programmed before an election, usually at a central location, and they're programmed with the list of races and the list of candidates and so on for that election. And then they're distributed out to the polling places and put into the voting machines. That's a possible mode of travel of the virus. If the virus gets onto a memory card at that central location, it will then be installed out into the voting machine. After the election, the memory cards go in the opposite direction to carry the votes back to the county clerk or board of elections office to tabulate them. And that allows the virus to go in the other direction. So a virus in one machine may hitch a ride on a memory card after an election back to the election headquarters, and then potentially spread there onto many other cards, which are then distributed, say, for the next election. This is much like the process by which older computer viruses spread on floppy disks. If you put an infected floppy disk into your PC would catch the virus, and then it would spread to any other disk that you put into your machine. So it hitches a ride opportunistically on top of the flow of these memory cards that happens in running an election normally.
How do we answer Mr. Dixon's whole notion that paper trails are not acceptable to the disabled, and yet you say it cut down on voter fraud?
Yes, I do believe it cuts down on voter fraud, and I do believe that a paper trail well designed can be just as accessible. Mr. Dixon held up the roll of paper and pointed out that he could not view that or verify it or audit it. But the DRE system that he is advocating stores his votes on this, which neither he nor anyone else can simply look at and read. The problem with these DREs and the security problem is exactly the thing that Mr. Dixon is complaining about, the inability of any voter to look at the machine and see their vote recorded. So I don't believe that there's a conflict between the use of a paper trail and accessibility.
There are just so many questions that I have just put all over the place here. The whole notion, Mr. Cunningham, that you spoke of, and I see my red light is on already. That's what I'm saying. It's just so much and so little time to talk.
We'll have a second round.
We'll have a second to go back. Oh.
Second round.
Oh, second round. Okay, then my second round, I'll come back to you, Mr. Cunningham and Mr. Shamus, because I do want to talk with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Brady, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like a point of inquiry. Will Mr. Holt have a chance to speak?
Pardon?
Will he have a chance to speak? If not,
Yes,
I would not mind giving
by unanimous consent, we'll allow Mr. Holt as well.
Okay. Well, I don't think voting is a science. I think it's a person thing. I think it's a human thing. And I think that anything we do here, no matter what it may be, can be attacked, can be hacked into, can be verified, can be ballots, boxes can be put in a river, could not be shown. But I think what we're trying to do is try to eliminate as best and as most as possible all these things that can possibly go wrong. And I don't understand why a receipt, because that's what I look as a paper ballot, as a receipt. Why, when you vote and you get your receipt and you have that and you see what you voted for, and if you don't have that, then you can lodge some type of protest somewhere. If you have no receipt, you think you voted and you don't know, and it's up to now whatever tabulation or whatever machine or mechanical or scientific tabulation happens. And I don't understand why there would be a problem for anybody, having a receipt. And Mr. Shamus, you are in my state, and you have inspected many times the voting machines, and from what I understand, you had said that a malicious hacker could easily make the same switch, allowing votes to be changed from one vote to thousands of votes. Then, if that's the case, why are these systems? We think these systems aren't reliable. And if that's the case, what would be the problem with a verified paper trail? If I come in and vote and I want to vote for you, and I get my paper and it says I didn't vote for you, I can lodge a complaint right then and there. If I walk out of it with nothing, I don't know who I actually voted for, and I'm in the hands of that machine, that hacker, or anybody that could probably get in and violate the voting process. So I don't understand why this should be a problem. And then no matter what we do, it's still going to be a human factor somewhere, someplace, somehow. But at least the voter has the confidence that he has she has a piece of paper stating that, yes, I did vote, yes, this is who I voted for, and if there was a mistake, they may have a chance to rectify right there. That's my only point. You'll back my balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any answers or any comments from anyone?
Well, I can say,
Mr. Shamus.
yes. So it's certainly true that if a malicious hacker is able to gain access to a voting machine and replace the software that's in there in such a way that that change is not detected, then there are severe problems. And that's what I say when we find security vulnerabilities, we have to find ways of plugging them. For example, the vulnerability discovered by Professor Felton's group at Princeton was known to us in Pennsylvania back in March, right before our May primary. and we were forced to make an emergency remediation in Pennsylvania to blunt the effect of that discovered vulnerability, because we wanted to be able to assure county election officials and voters that an intrusion of the kind that was demonstrated here today was not possible, or if it had happened, the effects of it would have been reversed. And so we remediated that. We also instructed the vendor that the next time it comes back for certification, it better have a remediation of its own, so that we don't have to impose administrative procedures to make sure that that vulnerability can't be exploited. So I'm not minimizing the possibility that people are out there trying to hack things. My point is that the response to the hack is not to throw the machines in the ocean and go back to what we were doing in 1890. If it's a technological problem, we have a technological solution. With respect to the receipt, a lot of people think of the word receipt as meaning something that the voter can take home with them and look at it later at their leisure and show up maybe at some later time to an election official and say, see, this is really how I voted. It's not legal to give receipts of that kind, because you can't give a voter anything that they could use to prove how they voted, since they could then sell their vote. So the receipts that we're talking about in these voter verified paper trail systems, the voter has a chance to view the receipt on the machine and then say yay or nay, yes, that truly represents my vote or not. And then when they leave the polling place, they don't have a piece of paper to take with them. And my point, the point that I made in my earlier testimony, was that it's nice enough to show the voter that their vote was properly recorded, but again, there's no assurance that at the time the votes are actually tallied later or a recount is done, that piece of paper is even around or hasn't been replaced by something else. And there are people who are working on the solution to that problem, and we're not there yet.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just answer, you're way out there. I mean, you're talking about after voting, you're talking about people manipulating receipts that they may or may not. That's just, now you're becoming human factor after human factor after human factor. Somebody's hell-bent on trying to rig an election. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about voter confidence. That's what I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about a receipt you take home and say, this is what I want to change my vote, or I made the mistake. Because people do make a mistake. If you make a mistake on a voting machine, you make a mistake. You can't rectify it after you validate it. But I'm saying, as you're saying, to look and see that, okay, here's what I voted for. This is what I want to do. Push the OK button, push the vote button, whatever closes the curtain or opens the curtain, let you out. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's all I'm saying. I don't think there's anything wrong with our bill.
If I told you that mechanism could be used to discover how every voter in the precinct voted, it might change your mind.
Okay,
I learned that you people with this electronic, scientific, can show me anything I ever did in my entire life. So that doesn't scare me.
That might make an interesting episode. Ms. Simons, quickly, and then we...
Yes, I just wanted to comment briefly on this whole paper issue, because I think we're comparing apples and oranges. One of the basic issues is how well engineered these systems are. As somebody who was advocating for voter verified paper audit trails early on, before the machines were retrofitted, I have to say I was appalled by what the voting machine companies came out with. They are bad. I mean, Mr. Cunningham is right. Jim Dixon is right. These continuous rolls of thermal printed paper have privacy issues, as Michael Seamus says. But they're badly engineered. It's bad technology. There's no reason why why VPATs have to be designed that way. They were the cheapest way to do it. That was why it was done that way. I mean, banks deal with paper all the time. They manage to count it, and I don't think they make many counting mistakes. Other countries vote on paper, and they don't have problems. We can do it too, but we have to do it right. If you do it wrong, it will fail.
And for the last quick word, Mr. Dixon.
No, go ahead.
Chairman Ellers, I wanted to respond to your question about counting optical scan ballots by machines. We have a lot of experience in this country with that. When you have large numbers of ballots, hundreds of thousands, and you've got a close race, every time the optical scan ballots have been counted, you get a different number. You get a different number. We do not have the technology to accurately count large pieces of paper
All right, thank you very much. Next, the chair recognizes a gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for
Thank
5
you, Mr.
minutes.
Chairman. This is a very helpful hearing, and as I've listened, it seems to me that the point made by Ms. Simmons needs to be emphasized. The fact that we have a dysfunctional role doesn't mean that that's the only alternative available as an auditable trail. I spent more years on the Board of Supervisors in Santa Clara County than I have so far in Congress. And in California, the counties are the repository of the Registrar of Voters. And in California, the Registrar of Voters is a civil service position. I mean, it's very nerdish, I guess is the best word you can say in Silicon Valley, and very apolitical. And it wasn't really until I got on the Board of Supervisors that I realized, I guess I'd never really thought about it, that some of the votes get lost. People don't think about that, but we had the little punch cards for a long time, and it would jam up the machines election night, and some of the ones that got mangled didn't get caught. And it didn't ever, at a time when the country was less closely divided than it is today, nobody really noticed because elections weren't that close. But of course now we have close elections all the time, and we're paying more attention to it. And so I do think that we need to make sure, you can't have a perfect system, I suspect, but we need to have a system where people do not question the integrity of it. I remember going with a computer scientist in my district who really said this: yes, you can make a mistake. I mean, you can take a ballot box and throw it out, but the difference with hacking a machine is that it's not random, the direction in which those votes are going to be lost. And so I'm very enticed by Mr. Holt's bill. I would note that in standard setting, there's been discussion that this would eliminate the privacy of individuals, but on page 3, line 13 of his vote, it specifies that to comply with the act, that would not be permissible. So I think, part of what we do here in Congress is to set standards and laws that need to be met, just as NIST does from an engineering point of view. I'm wondering, Mr. Felton, Mr. Shamos said something to the effect that you could verify other than by paper means. I don't want to misquote you, but I think it was something to that effect. How would you do that with the virus that your lab created? How would you do a verification without? Would there be a way?
Well, I think that the idea of non-paper verification is something that's not ready yet. It's an active area of research. Mr. Shamos referred to Professor Rivest's work, which, by the way, is an all-paper system. And that is an interesting proposal, but I would not want to trust an election to it tomorrow. I think that years from now, we may be in a position to have effective and usable non-paper-based verification systems, but I don't believe they're ready yet. And I don't think we can afford to wait.
Mr. Shamos, your testimony has been very interesting, and thank you for your advocacy and your work on assuring systems. One of the things that you suggested that we need to make sure that vulnerabilities are protected against, and no one would disagree with that. But one of the things I learned in my prior life in local government was that elections are kind of, they're not chaotic, but they're chaotic. I mean, you've got, PTA mothers, and you've got volunteers, and there's schools, and it's really, I love election day, but it's not really a tightly controlled, and cannot be, because that's not the way Americans hold elections, unless we completely fund this and have full-time paid people, and I don't think we're moving in that direction. So how would we be able to, even if we found this virus, I know from Silicon Valley, there's a million ways to hack this stuff. How do you, given the fact that we have this chaotic system, we have smart hackers everywhere, how do you protect against those vulnerabilities in your judgment?
Okay, so there are several ways. One is that we're never going to achieve perfection. We're never going to locate all vulnerabilities that exist in systems because we don't know how clever people may be in the future to get around the protections that we've built in. But this is true not just in voting systems, in every kind of system that's ever been made. There are later discovered vulnerabilities. So, as I said in my testimony, I'm in favor of voter verification. Voter verification is a way of assuring that if a vulnerability has been exploited, that we're going to know about it. I think you just asked about a potential non-paper mechanism for verification. I'll give you a very simple one. The TS unit over there has a touch screen that shows things to the voter. The voter is not positive, however, that the marks that she makes that are visible on the screen are actually getting recorded by the machine. So all we have to do is have a second screen made by a different manufacturer, and we take an electrical wire and we gate a copy of whatever is on the first screen to the second screen, and we attach a digital camera to that, so it actually makes a record of what the screen showed. And if the voter has any doubt that it's been recorded correctly, she can press a button that says replay, and it'll show her vote again on the screen. And that vote gets recorded on a CD or DVD in a write-once mechanism, so it can't be tampered with later. That's just a trivial example of a non-paper verification mechanism. The second way of doing it is through something called parallel testing, which is used in at least 10 counties in California. It's going to be used in Massachusetts in November. It's used in several other states, where you sequester a machine or machines during the election, during the actual time of the election, and you have a team of people vote on them, simulating the way real voters would vote, except that they vote according to a predefined script, so we know what the total should be at the end. Then at the close of polls, we close that machine and we see if the totals match. And if they don't match, then we know that there is a rat somewhere. And we do a forensic examination to find out where the rat is.
Gentlewoman's time has expired, and I'm pleased to recognize our guest, Representative Holt, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and I'm pleased to see that that you are holding this hearing, and I welcome the opportunity to be with you. And I regret that the hearing is being held the day before our target adjournment for the year, but nevertheless, I think you've put together a good panel of witnesses. Let me just make two quick comments. One is, HAVA had the unanticipated effect of motivating jurisdictions to go out and buy devices for voting that are clear, simple, accessible, easy to use, and totally unverifiable. And it may be that there are various future methods of verifying that would be that are not yet thought of or not yet developed. But right now we have a method of verifying where each voter can verify her vote at the time of voting, and that is a paper trail. And I do think it can be made accessible for voters, for all voters. Mr. Seamus just described a rather Rube Goldberg-ish CCD camera that was going to photograph another screen. Boy, paper record sounds a whole lot easier to me. But anyway, let me first go to Mr. Felton, Professor Felton. How detectable would the virus that you devised or that someone might devise be before, during, and after the election? And let me ask another question. I don't know whether you're familiar enough with the kind of chain of custody and other checklists that Mr. Smith puts his machines through. Do you think a virus could be implanted in a system that had the kinds of protections that Mr. Smith describes?
First, the question of how detectable this would be. There is a long-established cat-and-mouse game in the PC world between virus writers and antivirus companies. And the virus writers have proven very successful at making viruses that are quite difficult to find, especially in advance. And I would expect, or I suppose fear, that we would see the same phenomenon here. We did not try to make this virus as stealthy as we could. But I think that if someone used the same methods that are used in the PC world to make viruses hide, it would be very difficult indeed to find in advance. Pre-election logic and accuracy testing, as has been discussed here, will not find the virus that we devised, because it simply checks whether the machine is in logic and accuracy testing mode or real election mode. And if it's in logic and accuracy testing mode, the virus simply lies low. So I think it might be quite difficult to find, and I certainly would not have confidence that if it were implanted, it could be found. The second part of your question related to the procedures that Mr. Smith described, and I think those sorts of procedures are very valuable. They do help to close the gap, to close the window of vulnerability. But we also have to recognize that procedures are not perfect and are not always followed. Like any other part of our election system, there will be gaps, there will be errors. And I still worry, despite the best of procedures, that the window of vulnerability opens enough that a determined adversary can get through it.
Thank you. Mr. Yes, Mr. Smith. If there will be another round of questions, I'd be happy to.
I would like to respond to that,
Yeah.
because I think it comes to the core of what we're really trying to talk about. I've listened to the situation with regards. I'm the only one here, by the way, that uses debolt TS units, and I'm the only election director, I guess, on the panel that does. One of the things that I've been listening to and been concerned about is how this virus would spread. I am an engineer by background. I hold a double-E degree, so I have some kind of technical capability on that. First of all, if you took one and you corrupted one of the... Can I see your memory card? Sure. Okay. If you took and you corrupted this memory card, it's going to go into one machine, okay? And that one machine in my county is probably going to vote between 100 and 150 votes. That's all it's going to be counted on. So the issue comes then is this card supposedly then is going to be corrupted. Okay, we lose 100 votes. That's not good, but it's not like we're losing 50,000 votes that I have cast in the general election in the last one in 2004. Now, this comes out, it goes back to the end of the process, as Mr. Felton has said. It's only going to corrupt one more machine. The machines are not interconnected. There is not a possibility of corrupting the 500 machines that I'm going to put in place for the 2006 general election. That is an issue. It is a tactic. It is not going to happen. Now, there are a lot of other things that we do. I mean, we have a lot of security in place. We follow it. I'm very anal about those types of things. And I've talked to Mr. Felton about it, and I think that he believes that in our county we have a good thing. The last thing is I'd like to respond to what Ms. Melinda McDonald said, and I think this was even as important as anything, is that the confidence that people have in our equipment is very important. I mean, I couldn't say anything more. We take, and after every election, we hand out a response card given out randomly to our people. We say, what do you think about the process? You want to have whatever. And I've got in front of you, it's not a technical, survey of the type, but there's 715 responses. You can see the names, you can see when the precincts, you can see the election was held for. In addition, you can see their comments. 99.5% of the people that responded to these things in my county said we did an excellent job. There was only 2 people, only 2, that requested a paper trail. So I think we're doing a good job in Forsyth County, Georgia. I think we're doing an excellent job in the entire state of Georgia. And I think that we need to be, I don't want to say recognized for it, but hopefully don't impose things on us which are going to make our job much harder to do. But I also tell you that I agree with Mr. Felton with regards to having, verification. But I believe that we do not need to limit it to paper.
My time has expired. I hope Mr. Felton will get a chance to reply, because on my visit to his laboratory, it was my understanding that the method of spreading the virus is different than Mr. Smith seems to understand.
Very quickly, could you give a brief response?
Sure. Well, without getting into a long technical debate, let me just say that when this memory card goes back to the central facility and is put into a so-called accumulator machine, which adds up the votes, if that accumulator machine becomes infected, it can then infect a very large number of other memory cards that are subsequently put into it, and it acts as a very very serious carrier of the virus.
Thank you. Just an announcement to my colleagues. I've received a note that votes are expected between 12 and 12:15. I would like to have a second round of questions. Let me suggest that each of us tries to limit ourselves to 3 minutes. And I will begin and then recognize Minority Leader, or the Ranking Member, then Mr. Doolittle presumably will be settled in by then, ready with his question. We were just talking to Mr. Smith, and I was wondering, Mr. Smith, what kind of system did Georgia have before it adopted the electronic system? Why did they see the need to change to the current system, and what were some of the problems you experienced with the previous system? Basically, is the new system better than the previous one or not?
Okay. I think I can respond to that. Fortunately, I took over as Director of Elections prior to the introduction of the Diebold DRE machines. We had at that point in time the punch cards machines. And by the way, I would say that the security level that we had on punch cards was pretty miserable now that I've gone through and listened to all of the, the technical dissertations that have gone on. Our punch card machines were monitored by a computer as well. That computer sat in it was a IBM 386 or something like that. It sat in a closet that we kept, and in fact, they downloaded software to it routinely, over the telephone lines. I would say that was highly insecure, and I was mortified at that when I saw it. The changes that we had 6 months prior to the 2002 election, Diebold machines were introduced into Georgia. We had 6 months in which to take this across the entire state. And I would say that the Secretary of State and the Center for Election Systems from Kennesaw State University did an outstanding job. I tell you, I personally used to run major computer projects. I didn't think they could do it. They did an outstanding job, and we've done it. We have continued to hold elections, and people are very pleased with them in our state. Are there problems? I think some of the things that Ms. Melinda McDonald brought up with regards to training poll workers are very valid. And I appreciate the fact that she's going to continue to fund it. I would like to ask her if she would fund the program also, so that it is part and parcel of a program that I have introduced, which is called Forsyth's First Vote, where we also use high school students to do it. 1/3 of all of my poll workers are students. We've changed the entire complexion of the people in our county. Maybe that's why we're running good elections, I don't know. But I've got poll workers that we turn away because we have a very good program. I'm very pleased with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then briefly, Mr. Cunningham, you mentioned you grew up in a small town in Ohio. I spent my high school years in an even smaller town, I'm sure, better known as Selleryville,